What's up guys, my name is Ace, and Season 1 of Modern Warfare 3 is here, and today we're going to be going over all of the details of the weapon balancing that took place with this, and there is a lot going on here, so that's going to be the primary focus of today's video, but I will also mention some of the other changes that came with this update. Keeping in mind, everything I mentioned here is focused on multiplayer. And diving right in, the first thing they mentioned is they decreased the hipfire spread penalty when firing and moving with SMGs. And this was meant to apply across the board to the SMGs, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to detect any difference here while firing and moving. As you can see, I'm going to fade from pre-patch to post-patch, pay really close attention to the hipfire indicator, and as you can see, nothing changed there. And I did test this with all of the Modern Warfare 3 SMGs. I'm not going to bore you with every single one of them, but it was the same result every time. So that's a bit unfortunate. At least with my testing method, I wasn't able to detect any difference here whatsoever. Perhaps something did change here, and it's just not something that I can detect with this particular method of testing. However, let's get into the next thing, which was with the MTZ-556. They nerfed the hipfire across the board. So this is while standing, while crouching, while moving, while firing. Essentially, all these values are reduced between 4 and 10%. So in general, you'll notice the MTZ-556 isn't quite as good at hip firing. Next, a couple of the specific attachments for the MTZ-556 were nerfed. The first one is the MTZ-Natter Heavy Short Barrel. And with this, they mentioned they decreased the hipfire spread benefit by 5%. So previously it gave you a 15% benefit, now it only gives you a 10% benefit, but I also noticed they adjusted the downsides with this as well, and it's actually going to be harming your damage range and your recoil values a little bit more than pre-patch. Similarly, the Bruin Thunder V9 stock on the MTZ-556, this one also got nerfed a little bit. And it was a similar story here. Pre-patch, our hipfire spread max would be reduced by 21.2%. Post-patch, it's now just 15%. And again, they also increased the downsides with this when it comes to our recoil control. So it's actually harming our recoil more post-patch compared to pre-patch. After that, let's get into the battle rifle category. And the first thing they did is with the BAS-B, they fixed the semi-auto damage profile. Pre-patch, if you guys watch my gun guide, you'll know we weren't getting any boosted damage to the body at least when swapping over to semi-auto, which is out of the ordinary for a battle rifle in this game. Post-patch, they just added a proper multiplier for the lower torso and upper torso and arm damage areas. And this means up close with upper torso shots, we are now capable of getting a 3-shot kill. And that means our time to kill potential to the body went from 345 milliseconds all the way down to 230 milliseconds, which is really, really fast for this game. So semi-auto on the BAS-B is definitely viable now. And that's nice to see because this was the one broken one in semi-auto. Next, let's get into the Sidewinder. And the first thing they did with the Sidewinder is they just cut down the aim down sight time from 280 milliseconds down to 265 milliseconds. And then on top of that, they adjusted the recoil values for 3 of the attachments. The first one is the Tempest Predator Precision Barrel. With this, they mentioned they increased the gun kick recoil control benefit by 5%. And here's your pre-patch versus post-patch. Honestly, you won't see too much of a difference in the actual recoil plots themselves. Next, we have the Huntsman Series R Integrated Suppressed Barrel, and with this, they increased the recoil gun kick control benefit by 7% on the Sidewinder. Again, looking at it pre-patch versus post-patch, I'm not seeing a huge amount of difference here. But then finally, we have the RB Borealis Rear Grip, and they increased the recoil gun kick control benefit by 5%, and you can see pre-patch versus post-patch there. And unfortunately, that's all they did with the Sidewinder. Personally, I still think this gun could use some more improvement in general, but at least with that improved aim down sight speed, it'll be a little bit better post-patch compared to pre-patch. Next, let's get into SMGs, and we saw some really nice handling improvements, especially with various SMGs. The first one is with the Striker, the 45 Striker. The aim down sight time was sped up from 230 milliseconds down to 215 milliseconds, and our sprint out time was reduced from 110 milliseconds down to 100 milliseconds. So that, combined with the previous buff to the Striker, I think makes this a pretty solid choice. I think these were appropriate buffs for this gun. Then with the WSP Swarm, they improved the aim down sight time from 190 milliseconds down to 175 milliseconds. That is an insanely fast aim down sight time. And not only that, our sprint out time was improved from 110 milliseconds down to 88 milliseconds, which again is a very, very fast sprint out time. And I think these are nice improvements to the WSP Swarm. And then finally for the SMG category, with the Striker 9, we saw some similar improvements. Our aim down sight time was improved from 225 milliseconds down to 205 milliseconds, and our sprint out time was reduced from 110 milliseconds down to 100 milliseconds. With this one, unfortunately, I don't think this makes up for how bad they nerfed this with the previous weapon balancing updates. I still think the Striker 9 is not a very good choice for you, but this will at least make it feel a little bit better than it did before this update. And unfortunately, that's all we saw to the SMG category. Honestly, I was kind of hoping for a few more improvements to all of the SMGs, to be honest, aside from maybe the Rival 9. I think that one's in an okay state. But that's just my opinion on that. Now let's move on to the Riot Shield adjustment. I don't want to say nerf or buff, because it was a little bit of both. The first thing they did with this is they improved our melee damage from 50 up to 75, which means instead of being a 3-hit kill, it's a 2-hit kill. So if you're using that Riot Shield as your primary, this is a net buff to the Riot Shield. However, now when you have the Riot Shield on your back, you're going to get a flat 10% reduction to your movement speed, which is quite noticeable. And this applies when you're sprinting, when you're just walking, or when you're strafing in a gunfight. And I'm personally really happy to see this. This is literally the only weapon in the game that gives you an active benefit when it's stowed and it's not even in your hands. And therefore, I think this downside is very appropriate. After that, let's circle back to the Lockwood 680 shotgun. And while most of their patch notes are very clear, and I really appreciate that they provide actual values, this one was very confusing and I don't quite understand it. They mentioned that Tac Stance will no longer reduce damage pellet count. And I'm not sure what damage pellet count means, but I checked pre-patch to see if your pellet count was any different when in Tac Stance versus when hip firing, for instance. And no, it was exactly the same either way. I also tested the point blank damage while aiming down sight, and that was 200. And then in Tac Stance, it was also 200. So I didn't see any difference to damage there as well. So honestly, I don't know what this means, but perhaps you'll notice that the Lockwood 680 is a little bit better in Tac Stance now. After that, let's move into the Modern Warfare 2 guns and the adjustments they got for Modern Warfare 3. The first thing is they now equalize the reserve ammo between Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3 guns. That was one of the big upsides pre-patch to using a Modern Warfare 3 gun. With those, you would generally spawn in with an additional 3 magazines in your reserve, whereas with Modern Warfare 2 guns, you only had 2 magazines in reserve. Now that has been equalized, so Modern Warfare 2 guns will have 3 mags in reserve. Additionally, across the board, they decrease the hipfire spread benefit of underbarrel vertical grips on Modern Warfare 2 guns, and they decrease the hipfire spread benefit of applicable lasers by 2 to 5% for Modern Warfare 2 guns. Then let's get into the specific weapon adjustments. The M4 caught a massive buff here. In the maximum damage range, we now deal 34 damage to the entire body, whereas previously it was only 28 up close. And this means it's now a guaranteed 5-shot kill to the body up close, whereas pre-patch it was a 6-shot kill, and that means our time to kill potential was reduced from 370 milliseconds, which is very slow, down to 296 milliseconds, which is extremely competitive. And while this also came with a headshot multiplier nerf, this is still a massive net buff to the M4, and it's probably going to be feeling pretty good after this update. Now, one quick thing I want to point out here is if you read the patch notes, it says that this upgraded it to a 35 damage. However, in-game, I tested 34, and I'm going to go with what I actually experience in-game rather than what I see in the patch notes. As for Modern Warfare 2 battle rifles, the TAQ-V got a really nice buff here. Pre-patch, we had different body multipliers for the leg, the lower torso, and the upper torso and arms, whereas now they've just equalized all of those to the pre-patch upper torso and arm damage. So this is just going to make the TAQ-V significantly more consistent no matter where in the body you're shooting them. And it's much less likely that you're going to drop off to a 6-shot kill in close quarters, for instance. After that, we have the Modern Warfare 2 SMGs, and the Vaznev-9k actually got a little bit of a damage buff in the second damage range, so not the maximum damage range, but just beyond that. And while this was a very minor adjustment, what this does is it now guarantees a 5-shot kill anywhere to the body in that second damage range, whereas previously, if you mixed a single leg shot in there, it would now make it a 6-shot kill. So this is actually going to feel quite a bit more consistent in that mid-damage range, and that's nice to see. And we actually saw a really similar thing done to the ISO 45, but instead of the second damage range, this is in the maximum damage range. Pre-patch, we had to hit every single shot to the torso if we wanted to get a 5-shot kill, and mixing one leg or arm shot in would increase that to a 6-shot kill, whereas post-patch, with this minor improvement to our damage, it's now guaranteed to be a 5-shot kill no matter where in the body you're shooting them. After that, in the Modern Warfare 2 shotgun category, with the KV Broadside, they slightly increased the medium far damage range from 9 meters to 10 meters. But on top of this, they mentioned they decreased our aim down sight spread a little bit. And it turns out this was actually a very noticeable improvement to our aim down sight spread. We saw a roughly 20 to 25% reduction in this spread while aiming down sights. And therefore, if you are stretching the range even just a little bit with the KV Broadside, you definitely want to get aim down sight now. Then for Modern Warfare 2 LMGs, we saw an improvement to the RAAL MG. Our aim down sight time was cut down from 470 milliseconds all the way down to 390 milliseconds. That's a huge improvement to your aim down sight speed. And also, our sprint out times were improved quite noticeably as well, from 375 milliseconds down to 320 milliseconds. As for the 556 Icarus, this one also saw some adjustments. It saw a little bit of a buff to its body damage up close. So now it's a guaranteed 5-shot kill anywhere in the body, whereas previously you couldn't even get a 5-shot kill to the body up close. So that cuts our close range time to kill from 385 milliseconds all the way down to 308 milliseconds, which is much more competitive. However, this did come with a headshot damage nerf, but this is definitely a net buff to the Icarus. Now we're almost there, just a couple more guns to go. In the marksman rifle category for Modern Warfare 2 guns, the SPR-208 saw a pretty nice improvement to its range. Its one-shot kill potential to the upper torso used to be about 15 meters, and now it's 20 meters, so that's a nice boost there. And on top of this, our aim down sight time was improved from 370 milliseconds down to 340 milliseconds. And then finally, for the weapon-specific adjustments, the Basilisk saw some pretty nice buffs to its range values across the board. Our one-shot kill potential to the upper torso, that has been increased from 5 meters up to 7 meters. And then all of our other damage drop-offs as well have been improved, aside from the last one, that one's still 35 meters. So in general, you should notice a little bit more power with the Basilisk. So there we go, that wraps it up for the weapon-specific balance changes that came with this update. However, there were also a few key adjustments to attachments across the board. These don't apply to just specific guns, they apply to all of the guns that can use these attachments. The first one is the S37C DL Breacher device. This is the one that gave you a massive improvement to your hipfire and tac stance. Previously, it would reduce all of these values by 20%. That was a massive, massive improvement, whereas post-patch, it's now only reducing these values by 6%. So this one isn't nearly as good as it was pre-patch. And we saw basically the exact same story with the Bruin Tactical Vertical Grip. Pre-patch, this also gave you a huge improvement to your hipfire and tac stance spread at 20%. Whereas post-patch, it didn't get nerfed quite as hard as the previous one. Now it's going to cut these values down by 12%. I also noticed it appears to be helping now with horizontal and vertical recoil control, whereas pre-patch, it didn't help with those values at all. It only helped with your gun kick. Now finally, for attachments, I saved the most interesting one for last here, for those of you guys that stuck through the video. They significantly nerfed the hollow point ammunition. And in the patch notes, they stated they decreased the inflicted sprint penalty time from 800 milliseconds all the way down to 200 milliseconds, so that's a massive improvement. And this is basically just how long of a delay you have after being shot in the legs by hollow point before you can get back into a sprint. And you can see that delay is almost non-existent. It will still stop you from sprinting, but you can get right back into a sprint almost immediately now. However, another thing I was noticing with this testing is I no longer had that really disorienting effect. It no longer had that stun-like effect where it throws your aim off like crazy. And this wasn't mentioned in the patch notes, but this is a massive nerf to the hollow point ammunition. And I think a lot of people are going to be very happy to see that because it was a very jarring experience to be dealing with somebody using that hollow point ammo. So there we go, that's all of the weapon and attachment balancing that took place with this update. However, I wanted to go through some of the other highlights that will directly affect the gameplay in multiplayer. I'm not going to cover literally every single bug fix or detail that came with this, just the highlights that I think are the most important to be pointing out here. The first thing is I noticed hijacked IFF strobe is working properly now, so you will spawn in with the actual class setup that you intended and not just a random default one if you're using that perk. Also, something that actually happened over the weekend is they did fix the damage clamp on EOD as well. So you should never die to a single piece of lethal equipment if you're at full health and using EOD. Obviously, kill-streaky explosives will still be able to kill you when using EOD though. With equipment, they fixed the throwing star. Sometimes people were getting a one-hit kill with the throwing star, and that was an unintended bug. That has been fixed. It will be a two-hit kill as intended now, unless you hit them in the head. Then for field upgrades, with the deployable cover, now you're limited to using just one at any given time, and if you place another one down, it will destroy your previous one. And on top of that, the trophy system will no longer counter the mosquito drone, which is interesting that it won't counter that, but it is still countering cruise missiles based on my testing. And that seems a little bit strange to me just because the cruise missile is a much higher streak than a mosquito drone, but that's what they did with this update. On top of this, they made a bunch of spawn improvements, particularly for hardpoint, and they have brought like quarry hardpoint back, for instance. They fixed the spawns on that, at least according to the patch notes. I don't have any post-patch experience with this to confirm, but it looks like they made a lot of spawn adjustments for hardpoint and free-for-all as well, depending on the map. On top of that, you may notice they added a little stamina bar as well as a health bar to the bottom left of the screen. And this is just to give you a little bit of a better indication of when you're able to slide or tac sprint, and why perhaps you're unable to tac sprint after slide canceling like a madman, for instance, which I think is excellent. It's also like way off to the side, so it's not obstructive or anything, which is great. Also, something I mentioned in the previous video, they have updated the advanced stats a little bit. They've added an upper legs damage area to the advanced stats, as well as an empty reload quickness stat. Now, the recoil control values will actually show real values instead of just defaulting to 1 and then adjusting based on the attachments from there. So you'll actually be able to compare guns to each other. And then finally, they just added a little bit more fragmentation with our flinch resistance stat in the menu, so you get a bit more of an accurate indicator of what your flinch resistance actually is. On top of that, they did fix various map exploits. One in particular that stood out to me is on Skid Row, especially for Search and Destroy. You could actually look through this door and see enemy name tags, and you could shoot through it really easily. And there's a bomb site in there, so this was a very powerful spot. They fixed that, as well as a few other exploits that allowed you to get either like under certain maps or on top of certain rooftops that you weren't intended to be on top of. And with that, that's finally going to wrap it up for today's video of all of the weapon balancing and other important changes that took place with the Season 1 updates. Overall, this was a massive update, and in general, I'm very happy to see all of these changes that they've made. In saying that though, I still think there's quite a bit of room for weapon balancing. Honestly, like I said earlier, I was hoping to see a few more buffs to SMGs, for instance, and also guns like the Sidewinder. That was a very minor buff, considering how bad the Sidewinder feels. So I definitely think there's still room for improvement in this area, and I'm sure they will continue to balance weapons as time goes on. At the very least, I will say this was a nice step in the right direction, and I'm quite happy with this update based on my experience with it so far. Now, of course, these are just my thoughts, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about this update in those comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.